Hi, well today I'm going to be working with some nice thick vegetable tanned leather, going to be some good saddle stitching and also moulding around a fairly complex shape. So quite a few quite useful skills in this one. I'll probably do some dyeing as well. Now, tool in question is an adze and I want to make a leather cover for it. Now, the adze, it's used in woodwork for hollowing out wooden bowls, hollowing out gutters or chair seats, anything where you want to make basically a trough in what you're doing. And it's got a lovely curved blade at the sort of front cutting end here. An adze is actually far more challenging than an axe to make a leather cover for. And the reason for that is really, well, a few things. First of all, the blade itself is curved. So you've got these ears coming up each side. The other thing is the whole body tapers, and this is where a lot of people get caught out. They'll put some protection in terms of a welt at the front cutting edge, but not down the sides, and as you put your tool into the cover, you'll find you'll cut your stitching at the sides. So I'll cover that in a minute, but it's another little thing one has to sort of watch for when you're making a cover for an adze. And the other quite sort of interesting thing about this one is that you're having to curve your leather. So it's a bit of sort of gluing and clamping to try and replicate that curve shape, which is quite an interesting challenge. So we'll get on, we'll see how it goes, and we'll make a nice leather cover for this adze. As I say, I'm using vegetable tanned leather, roughly 8 ounce, that's about 3mm thick. I keep my vegetable tanned leather, the russet natural leather, wrapped in light proof paper. And the reason I do that is that in sunlight it actually goes darker, it goes like a dark straw colour, which looks quite attractive, but you actually want it to be fairly evenly sort of coloured. So I keep it wrapped, it's nice and sort of fleshy white in here. It will get a nice suntan as the tool gets used, but it's nice and even to start with. Well, it's a good idea to start off by making a paper template, because you can sort of cut it around and get the right sort of pattern for your leather piece. So I've got a scrap of paper here. When you mark out your template, what you want to be able to do is to leave enough space at the front for what's called a welt. Now, a welt is a layer of leather which you sandwich between the top and the bottom pieces that you're sewing together. So it's an additional third layer which is sandwiched in between so that the blade doesn't cut the stitches. And that's quite important, because if you were to just sandwich 2 pieces of leather together, sew them, this blade would cut straight through the stitches once it's being used, and it wouldn't last very long at all. So good idea to put a welt in. Now, what I'll do, I'll allow, and this normally works quite well, if you say a good 1/2 inch at the front for your stitches and your welt, so that's in front of your cutting edge. Down the sides you need to allow quite a lot, because with an adze the blade is curving up and you've got to sort of guess, and you can sort of hold the paper up to an extent, but it's surprising if I put little marks, if I fold this bit of paper up, as to where the top edge comes. So I'm just putting very faint marks there. It's surprising how far out they are, and that's because of the curvature of the blade. You want to allow a bit of extra space, obviously, for it to slide in and out easily, and you need to allow, if you say another 1/2 inch for your seams, that's being generous, but it's better to start off generous and then trim it to size afterwards. So I'm going to add a little bit, as I say, to make it easy to get in and out, 1/8 of an inch, and then another roughly 1/2 inch for my seams. Now this is going to be probably far too big, but you're better starting big and cutting it down. It's far easier to trim it afterwards. For your first bit of the pattern, the blade may slope in each side, but don't make your piece of leather slope in, because otherwise you won't get that wide front edge into the pocket that you're going to be putting it into. So keep those straight and then come down. So that's what you end up with. I'll just give you a top-down looking view on this. So here we are looking down. So a good 1/2 inch at the front for your line of stitching in your welt. These little marks is where, when I curve the piece of paper, which will be a bit of leather around, it comes up to that tip there. Good as. Added a little bit of extra space to get the tool in and out of the sheath, and then another 1/2 inch for the stitching. Now I know that's probably going to be far too much, but start with that because then you can trim it down as you go along. Straight entry here, because whilst the blade curves inward, that cutting edge has got to come in. So straight entry for the first sort of couple of inches, and then it's curving in. So that's the sort of the pattern cut. That will be the top bit of leather. The lower bit of leather will just be cut across here, and it will wrap around the inside of the blade. So I'll cut this out, and then we can cut the leather out. If you start by cutting it out a bit on the large size, it's a good idea. I'll show you why, because what you can do, I'll just cut it out crudely, you can fold it in half, and that way you'll get perfect symmetry. So I probably ought to cut that, oops, a little bit closer on these edges, just so I know what I'm lining up to, trying to line up to. Okay. I'm just going to fold it now in half, and then I'll trim it, and I'll get a bit more symmetry even if I didn't. That's the idea anyway. So fold it down there, and then you know you'll get 2 halves which are the same. There we are. Try and keep that bit straight. There you are. And hey presto, you've got a pattern template. So this will be the top. So this bit will cover over your top surface of your adze. I'll trim this a little bit more at the sides here, but this will have a little strap and a Sam Brown stud to hold it so that the cover is held onto the adze, onto the head of the adze. There will be an extra layer of leather in front of the cutting blade and also at the sides. Now that's quite important to have additional leather protection down the sides, because when your cutting blade enters the sheath, it will cut if you don't have your welt extended. And then there will be another bit of leather. There'll be a welt at the front edge and also extending down the side, and on the inside there'll be a bit of leather like that, so that the blade is then protected in, if you like, a pocket of leather. And right at the back I'll put a strap with a Sam Brown stud, so I'll rivet on the strap and put a Sam Brown stud here to hold it, to hold the actual cover in place. So that's what it's going to look like. To be frank, if you get this pattern cutting right, you are over the most difficult parts, because I've laboured this, I know a little bit, the actual how of cutting it out, but be generous, allow for your blade entry, and you'll be fine. But the mistake, as I say, people make is they don't allow for the blade entry because it's obviously wider here than it is there. They taper this. And the other big mistake is putting a welt, not having a welt coming down the side. Because then as you go in, these cut your stitches down the side. So make sure you have a welt all the way around. It will become even clearer as we work through it. So we'll carry on. I'll cut out our leather shapes next. Now, the really good thing about a project like this is you don't need much leather, so it's lovely and cheap to do. And I have a nice little offcut section along here, so we will use that I'm going to draw around this paper template using a leather marking pen, and it's just a little silver sort of pencil pen. I'll pop a link down below actually for sort of bits and pieces I'm using, because when I come to glue I'll be using pegs. So I'll put a link for these pens. I know it's these sorts of things which actually are quite useful. They don't cost much money. They're even better when they haven't been out in the sunlight. It's really blazing sun today, which makes a change because we've had so much rain. And I'm having to sort of put a little awning up. I have an awning in front of my window to try and keep myself from getting too sort of hot in here. So otherwise with the sun it will get quite hot. But it's lovely. So this just goes round. It is quite useful for leather marking. Probably just about see that on camera. There's my shape cut out. So I can cut that out now, and that's the top level done. I'm being very careful these days to cut away from myself. You may have seen an earlier film, I had a bit of an accident. You can cut this out with a modelling knife, craft knife, whatever you like actually. So at the moment I'm just using a Saddler's Half Moon knife, which I quite like. It's quite effective. You don't have any environmental issues with disposable blades because you can just keep stropping and sharpening it, so it's quite good. I do quite like these patchworkers quilt covers, cutters. I'll show you down this side and you're seeing everything, all these options. It doesn't really matter, the key thing is just to cut it out. So they've got a rolling cutter, they're fine on thick leather, so I'd hardly recommend them because they're quite nice and safe as well. And they cut gentle curves like this pretty effectively. You can then cover the blade and you're safe. I use these on my leather courses and people seem to quite like them. So that's our basic shape cut out. I'm now going to cut another piece of leather, which is the inner cover, which will end just there and there. So going. Doesn't really matter where we cut it out from. Okay, one of my safety rules, rubber back so it grips your table, a very wide cutting edge here, very useful. Again, I'll pop a link down below just in case you want to think about one of those. So just line that up with the front edge. Hasn't got to be super accurate, but you want it obviously to be reasonably okay. So that's covering back as far as there. Basically it's covering the blade area. So once again I will cut that. Now what you'll find is this is going to be an inner curvature, and actually it won't need to be nearly as long as I've made it. That will become apparent in a minute when you see me just piece the two bits together. So what I mean is, and we'll start manipulating this, this is going to be your outer top, so that's going over your adze like that. This piece is your inner piece, which is going to go like that. Okay, and there'll be a welt in between the two, which will be stuffed in like that. We'll cut this properly in a minute. Here, this scrap gives you a better idea of what I mean by the welt. So what you'll find is, because of the way radiuses work, as I say, this piece, the inner bit, is longer now because it's all been bent up. We'll have to trim it, but that's fine. We can do that in a minute. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just manipulate this bit of leather a bit. You could dampen it to get it into shape, but actually you'll find if you just sort of work it with your hands a bit and just keep working it round, you'll get enough curvature on it to make it follow that blade when you come to do your glue up. So there's no need to do a wet moulding, just in this case just keep manipulating it and it will come along quite well. See, already it's getting a bit of a curve there, and that's really all you need. Curve it down the back end as well. It's a nice thing about leather, you can sort of work it and encourage it, and it's quite nice sort of responsive material. I do love it. There we are. Okay, so already you see got a bit of a curve. That will help when we come to glue up. Conversely, your inner layer has obviously got to be curved, so you got the right side out, so curving that this way, same idea, just bend it all along. It's a bit like rolling a bit of steel to get it to do a curve. In a rolling mill, you're working it, not just bending it in the middle, you're working it along its whole length, just encouraging it to come in, and that's the way that's working quite nicely. See how that's curved the other ways. Now when I put those together, they'll unfurl, but you're getting this curve shape, which is what you want. Now let's cut yet another piece like this, because I'm going to do the welt. That's the thing that goes between these two pieces. So it's a layer of leather which will go right around the whole of this piece, even down the sides. So it's like a U shape. Let me draw it. Better still if I cover my blade first. Just nearly taking my finger, tiny cut. Need to be careful. I get careless with these. Right, let me show you what I mean. The welt will go around here. There we are. That is going to be the shape of my welt. Just check that sort of size fits. So what you're looking for here is not only does it accommodate your blade and the thickness of your blade, but you're wanting to check that your blade can slide in and out, and that's fine. You do have to be quite generous when you cut this leather. It's surprising, really. I've got a scrap here which I've done my top edge on. Again, what you need to bear in mind, and this is what will catch you out if you're not careful, is that is going to be curved, that cover, when it's in use. So once again, you are shortening the actual sort of size of this bit of leather. Let me show you what I mean. I'll line up that seam there. If that's flat, you would cut it there, but because it's curved, you actually cut it at a shorter point. It comes up. So best way of doing this is to get your actual adze, wrap it round, and then with this piece line up one edge and do your best to follow that curvature, and then mark it and cut it there. So I'm just cutting out the welt using a little clicker knife, little curved blade clicker knife. I've quite got into that corner. Right, so when I curve this round, I should find that will now be the right sort of size, which it is. It's fine. You can have a little bit of inaccuracy, it doesn't matter. I suspect if I push this around I'll get it to line up, but if it's a millimetre or two off it will not matter at all, because we've cut all of this quite generously in the first place. But what I want to show you here is, look, there's your welt placed in position, and the test is, when it's in there, can you get your blade in, and is there enough room around your blade? And this is fine. Wouldn't want it actually any tighter, and when you think I cut this all quite generously, it's, you know, a bit of a test really. Anyway, I'll glue this in next. To make the glue stick, I'm going to just sort of rough up the surface a bit, because I find very often that they treat the sort of hides with something like a sort of waxy seal, and the glue doesn't always sink in well. So whatever way you like, I personally quite like just to put a skiving knife over and just lift that surface a bit. It only needs to be sort of like crumbs off the surface, and very little, but it's just enough to get that glue being sort of happy. Give it something to bite onto. If you don't do this, what you'll find is you'll start sewing and your seams will suddenly start to sort of like come apart. You know, the glue seams will come apart, which can be very frustrating. So it's worth just trying to get off a little bit on both surfaces, and then the glue will hold so much better. Again, it's a little, if you like, tip, but it's one which will make life easier for you. You do need, with this sort of thing, you need to have the glue holding well. It's quite easy to do because you can sort of see the change in colour. If you haven't got a knife like the one I'm using here, a round knife, you can just use an ordinary skiving blade if you want to, disposable skiving blade. Anything like that will do it. So do all surfaces. So the glue should take fine on this smooth surface, although I will rough it a bit. But again, just go along on the inside here. A bit more tricky as it's a thinner sort of piece, but just take your time and rough it up a bit like that, and that will stick so much better if I don't go in too deep. So I'll carry on just roughing this up, just taking a bit off on all the surfaces. I'm just going to stamp my maker's mark. So it's just one of my smaller maker marks. It's quite good fun. You could stamp your name if you wanted to. So what I've done now is I have been busy skiving off here, just enough to roughen the surface, no more. Same with my welt, and I've done that both sides of the welt. I've got fragments of leather everywhere, so that will go in there. You'll see a bit more now what I mean when I say the width is different, because it curves, because that looks like it's not big enough, not wide enough. But if you bend it up, it suddenly becomes the right size, and that's to shape the blade, obviously. And then my inner cover, so there'll be like a leather sandwich here, like that. So actually I'm going to trim this a bit more now, and then I'll be ready to glue it, and then it will be sewing. So for the leather glue up, I'm using some Fibings Leathercraft cement. I find this quite good. It seems to dry quite quickly. It's very much like a PVA type glue. Apply it fairly generously, and that way hopefully one fills in any sort of gaps. I personally apply it to both surfaces, just because then you have a chance to work it in a bit with your finger. So I'm just spreading a nice layer on there. It's quite warm at the moment, so this is going to dry pretty quick. At least by applying it both sides, you actually know that you've got your piece quite well coated. Try and get it to the edges, and try not to get it on your outer surface. I normally get glue everywhere. So far so good. You can glue it all as one sandwich in one go, or you can do it in 2 stages. Because it's quite warm, I'm going to do this in 2 stages, because it will give me a little bit more control. So I'm just popping some little clips on here to hold it in position while it dries. The clips are the sort of clips you get for people who do patchwork quilting, and I find they're very good for leather work. They come in different sizes. Again, I'll pop some links in so that you can find them. I use them quite a lot for, particularly when I'm sewing up things like bags. I find them very useful. I'm going to need to put a few more clips on this. I'll get it roughly in position, and then I'll go in with clips in the gaps. Otherwise it will be gapping everywhere. I'm using little bits of leather offcut over the clips, just really to try not to mark the leather surface too much. And again, I'm manipulating everything as I do it. Try and keep this curve. Do the sides. Have to be a bit careful with the sides so that they don't start to sort of go in too far, but that's looking quite happy at the moment. Again, get them anchored in. I have to work fairly quickly because this glue is not going to hang around in this heat. There we are. Using the little scraps of leather here over the pegs, I'll mark the bits of leather, which doesn't matter, though, if you like, can be reused and reused, but it does mean that I don't mark my piece of work quite so much. So I find it's quite a good way. Right, nearly done there. Lots and lots of clips, hold it all over the place, let that dry. Final check at this stage. Yeah, that's giving that enough room in there to get it in and out. The welt's going to do its job. I've probably almost cut it too generous on width, but I think I'd rather it be generous and not have to fight to get it in. But that's certainly going to work at the front edge. While the glue's been drying, I've just been making a little strap which will actually hold the cover, so it will keep it in position, stop it falling off. So I'm just rounding off the edges on the strap. At least the plan is to rivet this on and then use a Sam Brown stud to actually totally secure it. So just round off those corners a bit. Right, that's fine. So that's my strap blank on the way. I'm now going to glue in the inner cover. So again, just applying the glue. Rub it all over. Just use a rag if you get bits going. Oops, a bit mucky on the outside there. There we are. Just wipe my fingers off before I get stuff everywhere. Again, same idea. Press your pieces together, but it's best to work in the centre first. So again, use some slightly bigger clips this time. Glue it down and clamp it, and that can be drying. Keep the curvature there that I want. I want a fair bit of curvature on this. And just work around with the little clamps. Using slightly bigger clamps this time. Again, I'll try and find a link and pop those up for you. So it'll all be in the video description. Any sort of bits that I'm using which perhaps aren't so regular, I'll try and pop a link. If the thing's on Amazon, I'll pop you a link up there. I'll do UK and US links. So I think that's going okay. We can do a quick check. Yeah, it's looking about the right. It hasn't got to be super sort of accurate, any of this, because you can sort of mold it to shape, but you want to get it reasonably accurate, if you sort of get what I'm saying. So again, more clamps. Like that. A bit more here. So I'm just going to check that's looking about right before I do too much more. I need to get these outer ones slightly further up. One to make a more of a gap to get the blade in. So I've got a bigger gap. So a larger gap in there is what I'm trying for. So this will slide in more easily. Leave it there. I will beef it up with another clamp on this side. And then I will just manipulate this around. Increase that gap a little bit. Right, I feel like I've got clamps everywhere. I've made this gap a bit larger, and that will make that easier to get the tool in. I won't overstress it by pushing it the whole way, but hopefully you can see now that the tool is going to go in that gap. It sits fairly happily, so that's going the right way. So just to recap, to increase this gap here, to get the tool in, I pulled up the lever at each corner and clamped it. So I'll let that dry, and then we'll be ready for the next stage, which will be doing some stitching. So I'm just trimming off the excess all around. I'm just trimming all around now, just trying to get these 3 layers of leather catching up. Trying to get it to look roughly the same each side. That's not bad actually. So you can see the three layers here. Got the top layer, the middle welt, and then the bottom layer. And that's what it looks like as you look down it there. So the blade goes in here. So the welt's going the whole way back each side. So that's trimmed up. Quite pleased with the way that's gone. So next thing now is to put a channel in to do some stitching. So I'll set a little channel to recess my stitches. I will then make some holes for the stitches and then saddle stitch this piece. So these three layers are all together. Now to pierce this, if we've got 3 layers of leather, it is going to be quite challenging. So just as an example, I don't think one will get very far trying to use a 6-prong stitching chisel, because to get it in, well, you could hammer it in, but then to extract it would be quite difficult. One could use, you know, a 2-prong. It'd be easier to get in and out. And the other option is one uses just a plain pointed awl to push in singly. I think that is the way I will probably try this to start with, because I think it will be easier getting through these layers of leather that way. And I'll see how I get on with that. And if I don't get very far, I'll go back to using stitching chisel. To mark the spacing on my stitches, I'll use a stitch marker, so one of these things. Anyway, I'll show you. So now I'm going to sink my channel for the stitching, and I'm going to just rest this over the end of the anvil, as it's quite a nice shaped surface. So I'm just using a little grooving tool here, and it just takes out a bit of leather so I can then sink the stitches down below the surface. I'm going to do a couple of cuts so it's a nice reasonably deep channel. Now's the time really, if you want to dye this before you do your stitching. There's quite a lot to be said for it, because obviously if you don't want to dye your stitching, oops, damn, you don't want it there. And I've just gone over. It's a little bit annoying, but never mind. Right, might be able to trying to get rid of that mark I've just gone and made. My excuse is I'm leaning over at an odd angle to be underneath the camera. There we are, that's fine. So same thing down the sides. Again, just take a couple of slices at that, maybe 3. Same the other side. I'm now going to use a stitch marker, a little wheel, and that will get me my spacing for my stitches. So just pressing fairly firmly, and hopefully you can just see that you get some little dots. Do the other side. There we are, and then do it over the curve. So I'm trying to do this in a way that you can see it without getting my hands in the way. So again, I'm just marking in these little stitches. There we are. So what I'm going to do now is pierce my stitching holes all around here. And I'll need to try and support it so that this doesn't come unglued as I do that. I'm going to use a pointed awl, so it is just a basic round pointed awl, because that will go into this leather quite nicely. I could use a diamond awl. That would just require me to get everything lined up a bit better. Wouldn't be a bad idea, but I think I'll start with a round one. I think you would find it a lot easier with a round one, but the diamond one is an option. I'm just pressing this down through the leather. I've put a poly board on my anvil, the one that fits the anvil, and then I've got a bit of off-cut scrap leather. In fact, I may pack a couple of those under here, and then the awl can go into the leather, and I'm not sort of damaging that point on the awl. So I'm just twisting and pushing, trying to keep it as upright as I can as I do that. I'm doing the curved bit over the nose of the anvil just because that's also a bit curved, so it puts less strain on it. I mean, if you don't have a little anvil or anything, don't worry, just put a bit of packing underneath, like the end of a book or something, a bit of wood. Got my 3 layers of leather that the awl is going into, so I'm not going to damage the point of my awl. Nearly there. It does take quite a lot of pressure doing this. But it gets quite a nice result at the end of the day. There we are, last one. Yep, they're coming through the other side. So they've come through the other side there. Not too badly in alignment, some a little bit out, but it's not too bad. Right, do the channel underneath. Do this sort of semi freehand. I'm doing the curved bit over the nose of the anvil just because that's also a bit curved, so it puts less strain on it. I mean, if you don't have a little anvil or anything, don't worry, just put a bit of packing underneath, like the end of a book or something, a bit of wood. Got my 3 layers of leather that the awl is going into, so I'm not going to damage the point of my awl. Nearly there. It does take quite a lot of pressure doing this. But it gets quite a nice result at the end of the day. There we are, last one. Yep, they're coming through the other side. So they've come through the other side there. Not too badly in alignment, some a little bit out, but it's not too bad. Right, do the channel underneath. Do this sort of semi freehand. Some of these holes when I come to stitch I'll need to slightly realign. That's okay. There we are, that's that side. And then round my curve. So just get this underside grooved. There we are. Actually those have gone quite well, which is good. There we are. So that will sink any of my stitches down below the surface. So I'm now ready for the stitching part. So thread wise, I'm going to use some incredibly strong braided polyester. This is tiger thread, and I'll be doing 2 needle saddle stitch. So I want to have roughly 4 times the length of my stitching in thread to get around there. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Always make that a bit generous. And then I've got some fairly fine needles, so this needle will go through a bit more easily simply because it's very slim. And usual saddle stitch trick with your needle to keep it on the end of your thread, you pierce the thread with your needle. I have done this on earlier films, so I know I put one up hand stitching a belt, but I go into this in a bit more detail. That basically locks the needle nicely on your thread. So needle each end, and be good to go. Again, just attaching the needle by stabbing the thread. So I've stabbed that thread, pull it over, and that will lock it on. I won't go into some more detail on the stitching here because I have, as I say, put up films specifically doing saddle stitch on belts and what have you. Again, I'm just tucking needle through, make sure I haven't stabbed my thread, that's fine and clear. Feed it through. Pull it tight. So always enter from the same side. Always leave a little loop so that if you do stab the thread with your needle, you can extract it easily, and really just carry on like that, you'll be fine. If you want to see saddle stitch in more detail, I popped a film up where I was stitching a belt, and I think also in things like I did a black messenger bag that I did all by hand. That one also has a section on stitching in there. So my stitches are going in quite happily, they're below the surface both sides, so that's coming along fine. I'll carry on. Takes a bit of time this, so it's a fair bit of stitching. Most of the holes are okay. I've had to open a few up a little bit more. So that's the saddle stitching done. So what I need to do now, I'm just going to clean up these surfaces a bit more, just level them off a bit more. So then I will start doing the strap, which will hold it in position. So I'm just going around with an edging tool. Just to get that a little bit round, I can polish it later. So I'm using a number 3 edging tool because it's actually quite a thick sort of block of leather. And come down here. And it just takes off that sharp edge. I'll take it down to number 2 where I've got a single layer. I'm just going to put a bit of Phoebing's mink oil paste on this, so waterproofs, preserves, conditions, and that will keep it nice. So I'm just going to rub it all in. Means it'll probably collect even more dirt, but that's fine. End of the day, this is a tool cover, so I just want it to be strong enough and good enough to protect the tool in the field. This makes it actually look quite nice as well. I get a few coats of this soaking in. Stop the water if it gets wet in the field or anything. It helps it generally. The ends of grain, it's a bit like wood end grain with the leather. It obviously soaks up quite a lot more. There we are. In here. A bit around the edges. Right. I'll put some more of that on later. What I need to do next is the strap. Well, it shows it fits well. So, what's going to happen here? Make sure I've got that dead center. Yep. I'm going to be putting a strap around here. So, what I'll have is a strap like this, fixed onto there, and coming round. And there'll be a Sam Brown stud holding it inside there. So I'm just assembling the retaining strap at the moment. So I've popped a Sam Brown stud, so that's just a screw-in stud. Screw it on with a screwdriver, make a hole, screw it in. I've got a hole for a rivet, and then I've got the hole that my Sam Brown goes through. Like that, that secures. This collar I'm now going to rivet onto my sheath. I just need to make a hole for the actual rivet. So I'll pop a saddler's rivet through there. And that will then be ready to secure. So I've just placed my strap in position. Make sure I keep that straight lined up, and I'll rivet it on. There we go. Double check that's lined up right. And I'm using a little offcut of leather with a hole in it as like a depth stop for my cutters. And then I can rivet that down. Right, apart from a bit of muck off the anvil, that's been fine. Typical. Right. Give this a bit of polish. Oh, waterproofing protection. Including its edges. And I'll be ready to go. I'll give the whole thing another few coats of this. Let it soak in a bit. Let's just do a test fit now. So, adze, goes in happily, Sand brown rests on the back of the Adze there, and pop in, and that's how it's secured. Nice and secure, nice and quick to get out. One Adze cover, I'll give it a bit more waterproofing, but that will protect my edge. The stitches won't get cut because of the welt, and it's all nice and secured on with the sand brown, and it's quite quick and easy. This will loosen a tiny bit more. Quick and easy to get off, use it, pop it back in. There we are. Donk. And we're there. So there you are, all completed, all done. Nice and secure, it's not going to come off, protects that edge, and keeps that in nice condition. I'll pop a few links down below for things like the clips and other bits and bobs that I was using as we went along, if they're on Amazon, and I'll pop down them for UK, US Amazon. If you want them, you can obviously click on them. So I hope you enjoyed that. As I say, if you're doing an Adze, just bear in mind, keep your welts coming right down each side and keep it wide enough that your front cutting edge can get into the protective bit. But otherwise, it's not too bad. Just take it carefully. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.